guys, welcome back to 5-9 Gaming. I'm the Platinum Shin here with a special guest, the homie Goresh, to talk about The Legend of Zelda. Now the franchise is turning 35 this year. In today's video, we wanted to take a look back and see how the series has grown to define a generation of gamers. In terms of Nintendo's IPs, The Legend of Zelda is one of those series that seems to always push the envelope for whatever Nintendo console it releases on. With all that said, let's get right into it. Now, from the very beginning, The Legend of Zelda has been a huge success compared to a lot of the games that released alongside it. Goresh, what do you think drew people to fall in love with the franchise so early on?
Well, I think there's a lot of factors. You can't just really pinpoint one. But I think the biggest part of it is just sort of the sense of adventure that it has to it. You know, you are thrown into this open world, and a lot of the games are, released in the same time as this one, the original one on the NES. Didn't really have an open world feeling to it. Like you talk about Mario and stuff like that. It was just, you go from level 1 to level 2 to level 3. And when you talk about Zelda, you talk about an open world where, yeah, there's a set, dungeon system that you want to go through. But I feel like a lot of what's going on in this franchise is you want to explore the world. And a lot of the other games just didn't have that same feeling to it. The other thing is the satisfaction of solving puzzles in this game, I think, is a lot higher than the other games that they've released Nintendo's released in the same time period. I guess like Mario, again, I'm always going to go back and compare this to Mario because that's their other, big franchise. We could also talk about Metroid. You could talk about, I guess, Donkey Kong stuff as well. None of the other games really had, in my opinion, the same satisfaction of solving puzzles as the Zelda franchise did. And then, of course, you could talk about the music, which I think is another big aspect to it. It's one of the biggest things I think about when I think of the Zelda franchise. So those are just some of the factors that come to my mind when I think about, what, I guess, separates the Zelda franchise from the other franchises that Nintendo has been developing for a long time.
Yeah, I think a big thing about Zelda to me too, like especially the first game, it almost had it's gonna sound funny to phrase this, but it almost had that Star Wars factor. The beginning of the game compared to a lot of Nintendo games started off, here's a paragraph of what's going on. You've got the Dark Prince Ganon who stole away the princess. You're Link on this adventure, and it's got the music to go with it. It's got the catchy. Nintendo's always good at getting music stuck in your head, and Zelda is just one of the best at it. So I think just those things constantly keeps you thinking about Zelda. I know, like, as a kid, there was a lot, I didn't play Zelda when it came out. I wasn't born at the time, but a lot of games I played when I was a kid got stuck in my head because I'd be tuning the themes throughout the day, and like it just makes you think of the game the entire time. And Zelda was definitely one of those games that did that for me too. Yeah, and then another thing is, like, do you think the franchise has done a good job since that initial release at growing and evolving with the fan base? Do you think they did a good job with that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you take a look at the first game they ever came out with, and now you take a look at Breath of the Wild, which is the newest installment in their, I guess, sort of main timeline of games. Obviously, a lot of it has to do with technology, but just the way that the game plays is completely different. We went from a 2D game to a 3D game. Remember that they made that jump for Ocarina of Time back on the N64 for the first time. But there's a lot of evolution that happened throughout this series' lifespan. And I feel like, a lot of that is in part and in thanks to the developers over at Nintendo because, they're continuously trying new things and, they're not exactly always sticking to the same formula every single time. And I feel like that's definitely bore a lot of fruit for them in terms of the reactions from the player base. Some people even consider Breath of the Wild the best game ever that's ever been created, and let alone best Zelda game ever. So, I think they've done a good job at sort of tailoring their development to what the players want. And maybe it's not even something that players want. Maybe it's something they don't even know that they want, but, the developers somehow already know, like, what people want without even them telling them, which is something that you don't really see from a lot of other game developers these days, I think.
Yeah, I really agree with that because, like, you see a lot of game developers, things like Activision and stuff, who do the same thing over and over again because it's tried and true. It works. We're gonna get our money from our fans, and that's just how it is. I feel like Nintendo is not afraid to take the title of Zelda and slap it on something new because they're like, people are coming for Zelda. That means we can take the chance of changing it up on them. Zelda Breath of the Wild to me is not the best game ever, But I do see where people are coming from when they say that. I see why they say it, especially in comparison to the Zelda game that came before it. What was like the direct one? Skyward Sword, right? Well, that was like
Skyward
the direct
Sword,
one before it, where
that's the last 3D one that came out prior to Breath of the Wild.
Yeah, last 3D one, and I feel like that was one that people were kind of just like, when's Nintendo gonna bring us something fresh, you know? And lo and behold. They're just like, here's Breath of the Wild. After I think a couple years, it was shown like a trailer gameplay at E3, and it finally came out on the Wii U and Nintendo Switch, and it just blew everyone's mind. It blew my mind. It forced me to get a Nintendo Switch. Like I have not played nearly as many Zelda games as there are. I'm a pretty big fan of it, but I was like, I don't really need a Nintendo Switch. It completely changed my mind. I had to get one.
Yeah,
just because of that.
I think because there was a really large gap in between when Skyward Sword came out and when Breath of the Wild. Because I remember Skyward Sword was a Wii game. It was on the Wii. So there really was no main Zelda game on the Wii U. I think it was originally supposed to be on the Wii U. I think their next Zelda game was supposed to be on the Wii U, but then it got delayed. And then they eventually just made the decision to say, like, okay, we'll just, release it for the Switch, and it will be mainly for the Switch.
Yeah.
But there was a pretty sizable gap in between Skyward Sword and Breath of the Wild, I think. So I think they definitely took extra time to, make sure that since it was such a big difference from the prior games that have released up until that point, they wanted to make sure it was done right. And I think they definitely did a good job.
I really think so too. That game was one of the most fun gameplay experiences I've had in years. Definitely comparable to things like GTA and Skyrim and all those mind-blowing games that came out in the last decade.
Definitely agree.
As far as like other Zelda games, is there any specific ones that you have like a personal connection to? Did any bring up strong memories, and like what characters in those games have you grown attached to over the years?
So it's really hard to say which game I would have, place in order of, going from like 10, 9, 8, 7. Like, I know people make the list all the time. For me, it's really hard to do that.
Yeah.
Because it's sort of like, I love all the games so much that it's sort of like you're ranking the best, when people talk about sports rankings, it's like ranking the best basketball players of all time. It's like, if you rank somebody at number 9 best of all time, you're not saying they're bad. You're just saying they're like not as good as the 8 other best players ever. So, in my opinion, like, all of the 3D Zelda games that have come out, I think there's like 7 in total, maybe 6 or 7, something like that. Like, even the number 7 game I would rank there is still like a top 50 game ever.
Yeah. Yes.
So,
yeah.
I don't really know what my order would be, but I do have a de facto number 1, which is Ocarina of Time. It was my first Zelda game that I've ever played. And, I grew up in a period where the Nintendo 64 was the main console that was out alongside the original PlayStation. That's what most people that I grew up with were playing at the time. And I just remember being so drawn to the dungeons, being so drawn to the music. It was so captivating. And it was one of the only games where me and my dad would play together. We played the whole game together. And so that was something that when I think about Ocarina of Time, that I always associate that with it. So it's, have an emotional tie to it for sure.
Yeah. And
that's definitely one of the reasons why I think I guess I'm biased in that way, but that's why I have it on number 1 of all time. Yeah, it's literally my number 1 game of all time.
I mean, maybe there's bias in it, but even today, it's fun to play. And then just thinking about when it came out, I just played
it again on the Twitch channel.
And like thinking about when it came out, it was just one of those defining games, as Zelda has shown itself to be as one of those franchises that just defines itself as a standard when it comes out. And I know people in the comments are going to be like, what the hell is wrong with you? But like, honestly, the Zelda game that I have like the most personal connection to is not Phantom Hourglass on the Nintendo DS. Like,
really?
Nintendo DS was by far one of my favorite consoles of all time, handheld or not. I was in love with my Nintendo DS. I played Kirby, I played Nintendogs, I played all the Pokemons that came out on it, like for hundreds of hours. But Phantom Hourglass, to get like basically Wind Waker in the palm of my hands that I could play like and hide from my mom in the middle of the night and play it like till like the sun came up and I had school the next day. Like, it was so fun, and the story was fun, and it was fun to go on the ship and get upgrades, and like I just couldn't believe that a full fleshed out 3D Zelda game I could just play in my hands throughout the day. I was blown away, and of course Spirit Tracks was really fun too for me as well. But I love Phantom Hourglass. I would, as biased as I am, it would be in my top 10 for Zelda.
Yeah, I think also one that's probably not on people's lists or radars, I think, is a Minish Cap. And I remember coming into that, I think that was for the Game Boy Advance. I remember playing that game, and I remember starting the game, and I was like, okay, this is a Zelda game, but it's not something I didn't expect to be like blowing me away or anything.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, I think I beat the game in like 3 days or something. I was like, so entrenched into that game. So like, honestly, even if a Zelda game is not like a 3D, open world thing where you have like Breath of the Wild or Ocarina of Time or whatever it is, like Minish Cap, they definitely captured what it was to be a Zelda game in that game. And while it was different than I think a lot of other Zelda games are, like it definitely had that same core Zelda feel to it. So
yeah, just handheld Zelda games are highly underrated. I swear.
Yeah, I
swear
agree.
they absolutely are. Next thing, I mean, do you think Zelda has done a good job of onboarding new fans, giving them the same nostalgic moments many of us had years ago?
Yeah, I mean, you could even look at some of the games that aren't like technically main releases of the franchise. So like Hyrule Warriors, the first Hyrule Warriors game, has like all of the characters that I grew up with. You have like the Ocarina of Time characters, you have the Majora's Mask characters. They specifically took characters from all of the past games, a lot of the past, not all of them, but a lot of the past games, and implemented them in some way into Hyrule Warriors. You could play as like the Skull Kid was a character you could play with. You could play with Fiora from Skyward Sword. There's like, you could play with Ganondorf, you could play with Darunia from Ocarina. Like there's like, it was basically like an All-Stars, I guess, Legend of Zelda All-Stars game. But then you even take a look at some of the main games that have released, and there's 2 ways I think that a lot of the times they sort of bring nostalgia into play. The first one is items. Like we can just take, for example, the hook shot. Like the hook shot was like a main item that they've used throughout a lot of the games. I think Legend of Zelda had it. Legend of Zelda was the first game that actually input the hook shot. Majora's Mask had it. Wind Waker brought it back. I think it even came back in Link Between Worlds. And then you have the claw shot from Twilight Princess. So like they, like sort of changed it a little bit, but it's still the same concept. And then obviously you have the bow and arrow as like the main item, like the main item of like the entire franchise of the bow and arrow. And then the other way I think that they sort of bring nostalgia into the picture with the Legend of Zelda franchise is the music. The music for every single game is not going to be exactly the same, but like the "You Did It" jingle thing has always been in every single game. When you complete a puzzle, like the da 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 da, that one. Then you have like the famous songs like Zelda's Lullaby is pretty much in every single game in some form. So I think those are the ways that they do a good job of sort of, if you're playing a new game for the first time and you come across those, like, I guess sort of Easter eggs or throwbacks to older games, it really makes you you're like, okay, yeah, now I'm playing a Zelda game. It's like, it makes you like, that sort of flips the switch.
Yes. That was that last point about the music and the sound effects was the exact thing I was going to say too, was that is the biggest thing. They do that, and Nintendo does a lot with their games. With Mario, with right. Pokemon, is bringing back those nostalgic themes, but redone, made in a new way, just to like give something more of a fresh, new age feel, but also, a little elbow jab to the old fans who are like, I love that song. Makes me think of all the old games I played. And then of course, like the Master Sword in like every Zelda game. And I like that it's changed. I like how it's changed how you get it in almost every single game. Especially Breath of the Wild was like the craziest one to me. Having to go through the forest, figure out that puzzle entirely. I mean, I know there's ways to cheese it now, but like figuring it out for the first time, finally getting there, realizing you don't have enough hearts to get it. A lot of things like that. Just I do think they've done a great job to keep new fans and maybe even bring old fans who got kind of tired of the series. Like I said, where people got a little tired of the same old shtick that had been going for the last, over a decade of the 3D Zelda games, where it was new graphics, new storyline, but more or less the same gameplay. But Breath of the Wild, no pun intended, a breath of fresh air. And then I guess after this, where do you see the franchise going? Do you have any other wishes for the IP outside of things like maybe the new Age of Calamity Ganon, which is a great Hyrule Warrior game? But like, is there anything else that you'd be like, what, that sounds like a fun idea that I'd love to see Nintendo implement?
So I don't really know if I have any specific requests right now, but something that I really like that they do a lot is, again, I mentioned this earlier, but their will to experiment with different things. I think, Breath of the Wild was obviously a gigantic risk. Like they could have easily completely changed the game. They could have completely changed how Zelda is looked at, and people could have hated it. And they could have been like what the blank is this, and then just been like completely turned off from it. And it could have ended up being like a massive failure. And that's a lot of time they put into that. So they obviously knew it was going to be a success, but you never really know what the amount of risk that they took with that game. So what I think that they should do is sort of build off what they did with Breath of the Wild, and look at feedback that people have said. Like I know a lot of people don't like the weapon breaking thing.
Yep.
So small changes like that, and maybe implement those changes into the sequel. And then something that I would say I really didn't like about Breath of the Wild, even though I still think the game's like a masterpiece. I really would appreciate more traditional dungeons, even though I know it's supposed to be different. The one thing I feel like that was massively missing from the game, that really honestly is like a core staple of like the Legend of Zelda franchise, are those traditional dungeons. Like I am not a big fan of what they did with the Divine Beast in that game. I feel like they could have just turned them, or like even just scrapped the idea altogether, or maybe kept the idea in the game but make traditional dungeons like sort of take their place in the game itself. So if I was designing the sequel, I think a lot of those small nitpicks that people have, such as weapon breaking, tweak that, but then also look into adding the traditional dungeons as well. And I feel like once you do those things, like this sequel could easily become the best game of all time.
Yeah.
So
I mean, those are critiques that I think a lot of people have, myself included. Was absolutely that. And maybe obviously it fits into the story that the world's kind of alive but also kind of dead, but maybe more what's the word? Reward for exploration. That would be nice. But other than that, I think for me, I just want to see them keep this risk-taking attitude going forward with the games. It's like, take the risk, go for it. I want to see, because I obviously I trust Nintendo. They're tried and true as a corporation, a gaming corporation, and I'm okay with whatever trajectory they take it. I just want to see them keep pushing the envelope for their games.
So something else to quickly mention as well, and that falls into the same thing with them trying new things, is they like the number one thing that they've tried every single game pretty much is the art style. Because every single main game, with the exception of a few, have a different art style. You have the Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask style. You have the Wind Waker style, the Twilight Princess style. Even Skyward Sword has a different style. Like it's sort of like Twilight Princess, but more cell shady, cartoony. Like it's like a mixture of Twilight Princess and Wind Waker combined. And then you have Breath of the Wild, which is, probably the most liked one, I would say, at this point, because of how good it looks, right? But the way that they've done that is they sort of created a different Link for everyone, because everybody sort of has their favorite art style. So I think that's another thing that they've done a good job with experimenting with as well.
I think so too. All right, 5-9 Gaming, those are our thoughts on the defining series, The Legend of Zelda. Now, do you guys agree with us? Let us know in the comments below which type of Zelda games are your favorite. Make sure to leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel so that you can stay updated on all Zelda content and everything else gaming. I'm the Platinum Chin, here with the homie Goresh. Thank you, and we'll see you next time.